And our presentation is on transition, and specifically on helping students transition from high school into post-secondary or employment, following that through the IEP process, the IPE process, and testing and college accommodations. So I work with Disability Rights Florida. We're the state protection and advocacy. We have funding under federal grants that allows us to provide assistance to people with disabilities across the state of Florida. And our mission is to advance the quality of life, dignity, equality, self-determination, and freedom of choice of persons with disabilities.
Again, my name is Alexa Siegel. I was born and raised in South Florida. I was diagnosed at 3 years old with autism, and I overcame all my obstacles and everything through great help with my parents and great teachers throughout the years. But I became a self-advocate when I started high school, and then I went to college, got my associate's degree at 2013, and then I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree actually last year, 2016, and my main focus is photography. That's where I got my degree for, in Fine Arts and Photography, and focus on helping other students encourage them to be self-advocates and challenge the stigmas and stereotypes surrounding them.
And I have known Alexa since we were in 3rd grade, and I got to see her self-advocate and see her parents support her, and that's what sort of inspired me to be a disability rights attorney. And so I'm very excited to get to present with Alexa today and speak about the transition process from an attorney standpoint, and have her speak about it from the perspective of a youth advocate who's gone through it herself. And this is a picture of us when we were in 3rd grade, or 4th grade. So we're going to talk about preparing for high school graduation, applying for college, self-advocacy in college, and employment. Obviously, these won't all apply to every student. Some students do go straight for employment out of high school, but just to keep it all in chronological order and make it easier to follow, we're going to walk through as if a student were applying and going through college before employment. Just some important acronyms, because in the disability rights area we speak in acronyms quite a lot. IEP is Individual Education Plan. TIEP is the IEP plan that's for transitioning. Vocational rehabilitation we refer to as VR, and IPE is Individualized Plan for Employment. That's under VR. So you'll have 2 plans for a transitioning high school student, the IEP, which is at the school, that's the education plan, and the IPE, which is the plan for employment. The most important step for students transitioning out of high school is to begin working with your IEP team. And as advocates and attorneys and guardian ad litems, you can help support students by helping them make a transition plan, helping discuss with them where they want to go, what their desire is post-high school, whether it's employment, college, further vocational training, and helping to make sure that the student's IEP has supports and services to help them achieve that transition plan. The diploma options, in Florida there's no more special diploma. There are still some after effects of that change, in that students entering 9th grade in 2014-15 was the first year there was no more special diploma. So since students can stay through age 22, there could still be some students in the public school system who are grandfathered into that special diploma. And as advocates, that's important for us to know, because there is still an option for students to come off of the special diploma and to receive a regular diploma. So that's something to consider when considering the transition plan for students who entered high school before that 2014-15 school year. And if a student already graduated with a special diploma, they can return to public school if they're still under 22 and go for that standard diploma. That's important because it opens up a lot of different avenues to students after high school, because a lot of employers are looking for a high school diploma, and colleges certainly are looking for a standard diploma. And students who were previously receiving a special diploma, just because they received it doesn't mean they're limited to only being able to achieve that. So if it's right for the student and if it could assist them in their own post-school employment options, or if they want to go to college, then it's important to discuss that with them and to consider whether it might be right for them to actually go back to high school, through that 22nd year in order to potentially receive a regular diploma. So the transition IEP plan is a way to get that all documented at the school. It should be developed by age 16, but it can begin earlier if necessary. It can begin as early as, for example, 14 if it's right for that student, depending on what they need to, what it needs to be involved in the transition plan and what services they're looking at. It could be important to begin that earlier depending on the specific training they need. Each plan should cover the goals and supports and services the person needs in order to prepare to the fullest extent possible for life as an adult. And it should discuss how the student learns, how much they can learn, how often, and it's often more than teachers or adults in their life think. So we always advocate for the least dangerous assumption, which is just, it's better to assume that a student can achieve more and set the bar high than to set the bar low and limit where that student can go.
So I started attending my IEPs since the beginning, but more in elementary. I tended more towards the results of my goals, and then I, come in the end, see how my progress is, and I enjoyed that, seeing I'm progressing better throughout each year of my elementary school years. Then I attended to middle school, sort of same thing, but I was able to attend more in either the beginning or more the middle end of it, but still come see the results. It's not until in high school I got 100% fully involved from the beginning to the end, either just simple teacher staff meeting or just going over my IEP. But I started but my IEP team is consistent with myself, my parents, my EAC specialist, anyone who I want to come. Like later on, I'll just mention about VR, and my general ed teacher, and I would be very vocal about what my wants and needs throughout my IEP meeting, whether they like it or not. And during my TIEP meetings, I wanted, since middle school, go to college. And also drive myself, because in Florida, either you drive yourself or take the bus. I'd rather drive myself. And graduate with a bachelor's degree.
So, like Alexa said, it's important for the team to consider what the student's post-school outcome or their desired post-school outcome is and what type of work they want to do and the training supports and services that are necessary to prepare them for that. This can include what training they need in the classroom, in the community, or both. So it extends beyond just maybe what degree they want to get. If they want to drive themselves to school, what does it require to be able to drive yourself to school? If they want to be able to live in a dorm room, do they have the life skills necessary to be able to live on campus, and helping the student plan for that? So the questions for the team to consider are whether any functional vocational assessments are needed and whether any post-secondary accommodations will be needed. And then life skills, like I said, for living in a dorm room. Can they take care, what do they need to be able to do to take care of themselves? And this, isn't just for students with disabilities. This is something that should be considered for any student who's graduating high school, but for a student with a disability, it's the IEP team's job to discuss this and to help plan for them. So some of the education-related goals that a team should discuss are what type of diploma the student's going to receive, a standard diploma, a special diploma designation, whether they're going to defer the diploma and stay in high school to continue receiving services through the high school, whether they're going to go to college, whether they'll continue doing adult education or a vocational training. Work-related goals, there's integrated employment options, there's vocational counseling, vocational rehabilitation. Does the VR office need to be involved in the student's IEP? Do they want to be self-employed? And then community integration goals. Pretty often, I have parents say that their child is too impacted by their disability, they're not going to go to college, so what's the point of transition planning, or what's the point of having VR involved? And I think that takes a really narrow look at what a student could possibly be able to achieve after high school. And for some students, it's a great achievement, and it's something that they would enjoy working toward and would benefit from working toward. Just being able to participate in their community, volunteering, having a job that's, maybe it's not a paid employment, but it's a job experience. They get to interact with non-disabled peers, they get to get out of the house, or being able to live independently, or like this says, take public transportation or attend church. What skills can the IEP team discuss towards the end of high school to help a student in that way, post-secondary school? VR is the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. Their mission is to help people with disabilities find and maintain employment. While in high school, they can provide medical and psychological assessment, vocational evaluation and planning, career counseling and guidance, work readiness training and work experiences. Before students leave high school, the federal law requires that if they're eligible, they leave school with an approved DVR or DBS individual plan for employment that will allow them to begin receiving services. And it's important to start that process before they leave high school because it could result in delays if you don't start that process early. After exiting high school, there can be, there's available workplace accommodations, job placement and job coaching from VR, on-the-job training, supported employment. They can provide assistive technology and devices if those are necessary for employment, and then they can continue to provide time-limited medical and psychological treatment.
What is the qualifications to engage the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation? Because a lot of our dependency children, we have trouble getting APD and other people engaged with them as long as they're a dependent child.
So vocational rehabilitation is a required member of an IEP team for students who are getting ready to transition if that service is available to them. So, I mean, you could do an application for VR services for them. I'm not sure in the dependency how it would work, but
I was following along on that. I just went to a vocational rehabilitation in-service, and they said that they have terrible waiting lists as well for their services.
And they do, and that's why it's important to start getting their services early. But there is, under WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Act, there are different separate funds available for students who are still in high school. They're earmarked to be able to provide those services. And that waiting list is exactly why it's important to start getting them involved before the student graduates high school. Start the process early.
They were commenting they have like 3 tiers of need.
Mm-hmm.
The most severe.
And I think in Florida, and right behind you is my supervisor, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I was recently told we're increasing the levels of need we can support. We're not as restricted anymore. I think our waiting list is getting smaller. Yeah, she's nodding, yes.
And so I was fortunate to get VR to come and help me, help me with services. They attended to my TIP meetings. I had a counselor introduce himself, told me what VR does, and we discussed with my EP team about what I wanted. Basically told them I want to go to 4-year college, get my bachelor's degree, and get a career in the college degree I wanted. And so we did, went through the psychological test and gave me a little chart test, the multiple tests to say what career you want to go. I already knew I wanted the arts field. So funny, I get it back in the arts. It was like, told you. But they were willing to help me go, figure out what college I want to go to. I knew what college, and we figured out extensively of how we're going to pay for it and school supplies and stuff, which I explain a little further along in the slides in more detail.
So the pre-employment transition services that VR can provide are, like Alexa said, exploration counseling, what type of job a student may be interested in or be successful in. And that's important because not everybody knows exactly what they want to go into, and sometimes would be surprised by what their areas of strength or they're driven towards. They can provide work-based learning experiences in school or after school for students. They can provide counseling and workplace readiness training and instruction in self-advocacy. And the focus is on person-centered planning. So helping the individual with the disability determine what is the right course for them. So the IPE, as opposed to the IEP, which was in school, the IPE is the blueprint for vocational rehabilitation. It looks at what employment the person is seeking, and it's the map of how they're going to achieve that. It states the employment goal and the services that are needed. It should be a specific goal, so it wouldn't be just healthcare. It would be a particular job, such as a nurse's aide, a records technician, a surgeon. Instead of business, it would be a receptionist or a comptroller. Instead of law enforcement, a security guard, a detective, along those lines. It can always be changed if it proves to be too much, too little, or the wrong direction, but it gives you a clear idea of where you're going. And then it will list in detail the services that are needed and who's going to pay for them. So if further education is needed, it'll say how that's going to be achieved. And responsibilities for the student, such as meeting with their counselor, going to classes, participating in trainings. So like I said, we're going to take this down the course as if the student in this scenario is applying for college and going to college before seeking employment. So VR can assist with assistive technology, transportation, medical and psychological diagnosis, and temporary treatment. It is a time-limited treatment, so it's not in perpetuity, but they can provide diagnosis and treatment while the person is seeking employment, or in this case, seeking post-secondary education. And they can provide part of the cost of tuition and books. So DVR and DBS are not only to help with entry-level employment. The Rehabilitation Act requires that individuals with disabilities have an active choice in choosing their employment goals and can choose meaningful careers consistent with their interests, strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, and capabilities. So if it's an appropriate goal for a person to have an advanced degree, they're not limited to just getting entry-level employment. They're entitled to be able to go for that advanced degree. The vocational rehabilitation serves individuals with disabilities who need help seeking employment. It's not just for high school. I work with students with disabilities in education, so for me, I'm seeing them coming straight out of high school, but we do have clients of VR who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s who need help with employment as well.
So I've got a young man who's not going to finish high school by the time he's 22.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to keep plugging at it. Would there still be services available to him then?
Yes, yeah, and he should, I would say you could get vocational rehabilitation involved now and help with their planning because, for example, as part of his employment goal, he might need a high school diploma or a GED if he's not going to finish his high school diploma by the time he's 22, and that upper age limit's only for students with disabilities also. So, but at any rate, if he's not going to have his diploma, then is he going to need his GED for his employment goal? And that's something that vocational rehabilitation can start helping him plan. And then if he doesn't get involved with VR now and he goes through employment and he needs their assistance, or he attempts employment on his own and then needs their assistance later, that's possible too.
So, like I mentioned, VR, we discussed further wish for college. For me, I had them pay for my tuition, my books, camera, art supplies, and portion of my mileage. And so what I did for when I sign up for classes, as soon as I sign up, find the works with my schedule, print it out, send a PDF copy to my VR counselor, show them what I need to pay for. They gave me forms to go give personally to the school, to their cashier's office, whichever you need to go to first. Depends on which college you need to go to. You go to that person, give them the form, and it'll go straight to pay for your tuition, and for same thing with your bookstore. For if your textbook is through the bookstore at your actual college, I'm just gonna say FAU, for example. For Atlantic, I'll go to the actual bookstore, show them, VR my syllabus of my professor, need a specific textbook from their class. At their bookstore, they send a form. I go to the bookstore, give it to them, in exchange for getting my textbook, and it gets paid for them. And if there's stuff that's outside, which they're not going to sell art supplies at FAU at their bookstore, so I had to go to Pacific art stores and get through VR, and them had to work some kind of negotiation. They'll still get paid for all those supplies, but I got to show proof I need these particular supplies, they pay, and I go get them and exchange them the receipt. And then when I'll show them my mileage to, which we estimating, I don't remember exact mileage, to the school, which was about an hour to 40-minute drive, to and back. And I would send them, and it gave me a little bit portion of money back that I would pay for gas for my car.
So part of applying to college is standardized tests, and for students with disabilities who are receiving accommodations through the public school system, they're used to those accommodations. They receive them on the standardized tests in school, and it's important that they also receive them on the standardized tests for post-secondary, because we don't want the test to be testing their disability. We want it to be testing their skills. So you should apply for testing accommodations early. The SAT, the College Board site that administers the SAT, says it takes about 7 weeks to process documentation for accommodations on their test. And that's if it goes through the first time, because it says if for some reason they need more documentation or they have a clarifying question or you need to reapply, it takes another 7 weeks. So starting early is really important for these. The ACT doesn't estimate a processing time, but again, I would err on the side of starting early. So if a student or that you're working with is going to need an accommodation on a standardized test, then I would encourage you to start thinking about that as soon as they enter high school. These tests occur junior or senior year. The PSAT actually is sophomore year. So as soon as the student's starting to get towards high school age is the time to start thinking about what types of accommodations they might need on these tests, and start talking to guidance counselors or the IEP team about how to apply for those.
Which I found out, fortunately, when I took my PACT. I'm used to with the APCAT, where my EC advisor or staff will tell me, okay, you go to this portable room where you could take your separate testing. My accommodations were separate testing room from all the other kids, where they double the time for the test. I didn't get anyone telling me, so I was a little bit confused about it. It was PSAT day. I went to my ASC office, talked to them, like, oh, you don't get accommodation. I'm like, I do get accommodation. What is going on? They're like, oh, yeah, to send a form. I'm like, no one told me. So I was a little bit shell-shocked, upset. I called my mother, like, what'd I do? So they talked. They were like, the staff were able to just give the test to me, and I could work in her office, her private office, but I had to take the normal time like everyone else did. So that was a little bit harsh reality, and my parents were upset by this. And so we went, did our research, submitted the form to my junior year. We submitted my form for ACT to get my accommodation as soon as possible, submitted it so I could take my test within, I think, the fall or spring of the ACT that was coming up. And they just needed my psychological and probably a copy of my accommodations. They sent it out. They accepted it. They let us know that you can take this test on this day with your accommodations. But yeah, submitted, because what I experienced was, at least it was a PSAT and not the actual SAT or ACT, but through that was just a little bit stressful than less stress I needed. So yeah, do apply early as soon as you can.
And the school won't automatically apply for you just because you're a student with a disability, but both the SAT and ACT websites recommend working through the school to submit requests. They have one of the two testing sites previously allowed students to submit them on their own through an online portal, but they've recently transitioned over to encouraging students to work with the school officials, and the school official will use the online portal to submit the request. For the ACT, the school official will submit it and will receive the decision notification. For the SAT, the school will submit the request and they'll receive the updates and the status for that. Then if your accommodation is denied, or if you get a different accommodation than you receive. So it's important when you get a decision letter for a student to make sure that the accommodations that they've requested are the accommodations they were approved for. So if you requested double time, you want to make sure that the decision letter that you get says double time and not time and a half, and assume that just because it says you're granted something, it's what you asked for, because sometimes they give you something different than what you originally requested. But at any rate, if you get something different than what you asked, or you don't get your accommodations, for the SAT, the school can assist in the appeal, or you can contact the College Board office directly to discuss the denial. And like I said, they say that this takes another 7 weeks. So if you started earlier, it's helpful. And for the ACT, the school can assist with the reconsideration request. If you're having difficulty working with these entities and working with the school, that's what Disability Rights Florida is for. It's for students with disabilities who aren't, or persons with disabilities, but specifically in this case, for a student with a disability who's being denied their accommodation that they need. And they can contact our office. Our services are free. Like I said, we're funded by grants, and we can assist with working with these entities to determine if they're improperly denying accommodations that the student needs.
And what I did for prepping for at least the ACT, I took that when I was applying for college, or at least go to apply for it. My school was fortunate enough to have like some prep classes to take at night to, just to look over how they do math, because they're not saying the APCAT, because that's what I took. There's different tests now, but ACCAT is different from the ACT, so I took prep classes to see how they're going to possibly be. You can find out from your school, maybe, or outside resources to see if there are prep courses. I was fortunate my high school had it at night. Took the prep courses to see what they're going to be. I was happy to find out what it was about, and I was very nervous about taking the ACT, but I had a moderator that was going to moderate me, and got my accommodation to have a separate testing room with some extra time. Just reassure me everything's going to be okay, explain to me that everything's going to be fine, that I can take a couple breaks, and if I'm having trouble with certain math questions, she could read them back to me, and that was part of my accommodation as well. With math questions, she could read them back to me, but not the reading one, and I passed the ACT. Yeah.
So before you go to take the test, it's important, like I said, to check that admission ticket. Make sure that it's approving you for the accommodation you requested and not granting you a different accommodation. And make sure that your accommodation is listed on your admission ticket, so you don't show up on the day of the test without that listed and end up in a situation like Alexa experienced with the PSAT, where you're going to a room and taking it under standard conditions. Make sure to have copies of the eligibility letter that the testing entity will send, or the accommodation approval with you, just in case, so that when you show up there, the student has all the information that they need. And on-site coordinators should be able to direct them to the appropriate testing room. After the standardized testing is out of the way, for the college application process, there should be resources available at the high school campus to assist with this process, and the VR counselor as well. This is a benefit to having VR involved. They can help with that if it's part of the individual plan for employment, preparing the student for the college application process or selecting a college.
So I wanted to go to Florida University, FAU, because it was an hour drive. It was a public university, and I had a couple people that have gone there and done well afterwards. I had all my grades were A, B's. I did, beyond service hours. I did 2 years of foreign language, and I did well on the ACT. When I applied for them, they denied me. They did not accept me. So at that point, I kind of panicked, figuring out where should I go. So it was, in case your first choice either with a trade school, or even if you're just doing a state college, have a plan B. Luckily, plan B was literally right next door to FAU. On this campus, on this property, there was Palm Beach State College right there. So I went to Palm Beach, sent all my forms to them, and I got accepted to them. Thought about it, and thought maybe I could get my associates and retry FAU again. I got my art associates, reapplied them, got accepted, and finished with my bachelor's degree at FAU.
So once the student's admitted to college, they're going to need to work with the Office for Students with Disabilities to get their accommodations. Like with the standardized testing, students with disabilities have their IEP in high school, and they're being given accommodations through the school system there. In order to get those same accommodations or accommodations they might need at college, they'll have to submit a request for academic accommodations to the Office of Students with Disabilities. There's a different name. Sometimes it's the Student Accessibility Services Office, or whatever it may be, but at that individual college, and this is something VR can help with, or through the application process, you can work with advisors either at the high school or the college to make sure you're connected with the right office. Make sure that they know the accommodations that the student needs to be successful, such as extra testing time, special testing conditions, assistive technology, or for accommodations in housing. So students who need automatic doors or an emotional support animal.
So I went through, when I went to go visit my Office of Disability, Students with Disability office, I went through them personally because I've been told by my ESC specialist for years that my supervisor office, head person there at high school, say, you're not going to get accommodations, they're not going to help you with that. So it's a little bit upsetting. They're not going to, give you the same accommodations that you get in high school. They're not going to do that. Go to the office, nervous that, but I need extra time. I need a separate testing room. I have really bad test anxiety. I need that accommodations. So I go there, talk to the disability office counselor there at Palm Beach State, and then later on, at FAU later on, but at Palm Beach State mainly. And then she's like, I just need a copy of your previous accommodations, your recent psychological test, thanks to VR. I was able to have that already, and explain to me why I need these certain accommodations. And so I explained to them, and it was really simple. She's like, yeah, here you go. And I was just shocked, and I was happy I was able to have them, and just being told for 4 years straight that they're not going to give it to you, they're not going to give it to you. Oh yeah, here you go, goodbye. It was fantastic. So yeah, have a talk with them. I recommend, yes, you submit your form to the OSC office, but I do recommend meeting that personal counselor of yours, because I only have one counselor in Palm Beach State, but with FAU they have multiple for kids with certain needs. I had one for person that did with most of the kids in the spectrum of autism, and that's what I had. So I went to her, see her, and when you get to more the 4-year university, you have many different, in experience with FAU, maybe it might be different counselors for kids with certain needs and stuff like that. So I do recommend talking to them personally and everything personally about your needs and stuff. Yeah.
How recent should a psychological evaluation be if you're approaching a college?
I think that's going to depend. The school should be looking at whether, if it's a student with a disability, they should be reevaluating every 3 years or determining whether a new evaluation is needed. So they should have that on hand. And then, like Alexa said, students should begin working with the Office of Students with Disabilities as soon as they're enrolled in the college. It helps to have that personal connection, that face-to-face, and it helps to make sure you have not just the accommodations from high school, which were helpful. Like Alexa said, in her case, she was able to show what she had received previously and get the accommodations she needed. But once you have accommodations approved through the college, it's important to keep that paperwork as well, and make sure you have a written copy of your accommodations so that you have proof of what the school offered and what you should be provided, that you can take to your professors, and that you have to show what you're entitled to. There is a lot more self-advocacy that's required in college than in high school, and that's why one of the services VR can provide is assistance with self-advocacy training for high school students, because once you get to college, the Office of Students with Disability Services isn't always going to make sure that professors have the accommodations, and they're not always going to make sure they're following through with it. So there is self-advocacy required on the student's part to take that paperwork and make sure that you're looking out for your own accommodations and making sure you're getting what you need. And it's always helpful to meet with the professor directly and introduce yourself and say that this is what your needs are, and these are what have been granted through the Office of Students with Disabilities.
And I kind of did that when the first day of school we had with Palm Beach and FAU. They had a letter system for a while where it's literally hard copy, paper note, your first day of school, depending on your schedule. And I got my forms with each of my professors' names on it, with my own copy as well. I would either talk to them before class or afterwards, so that way if they need to, we could step aside, show them the form, and sometimes some of them would ask me, like, what does this mean, this XY combination? I'll explain to them what I needed. And like Megan said, you need a self-advocate, because they're not going to hold your hand through college. So if there's a professor that's not going to follow it, I had a couple of them. One particular one, I had a psychology professor who did online testing, and she she did her test online, and so then I will go online my test. I'm supposed to get double time for my test. I go online, and she told, like, I think it was like 45 minutes for everyone. So I expected, oh, maybe a little more. I go on, still 45 minutes. So I struggled with it, and I went to the professor, which I'm like, our next lesson was that day, was about disabilities and mental needs. And I'm like, I need this, like I talked to her privately, I emailed her, through my email personally to her, why I need this accommodation, even if it's digital, I still need that extra time. Like, it still follows, doesn't matter if it's not, it may not be handwritten or hand printed, but I still need that extra time if it's through the computer. And sometimes you need to self-advocate yourself, because I have professors, I explain to them once, they're like, okay, yeah, I get it, and they make sure they, fix mistakes. People are human, they make mistakes. But she was like, no, so I had to, then that's when I had to get my OSD counselor involved, saying, I tried, I emailed her, here's a copy of the emails I sent her, I personally talked to her at her class at this X day, Y date. So she talked to her, and literally within that week, she emailed me back saying, here's your extra time, so it's fixed, and I was able to have extra time when I went on online to take the test personally online for myself. And so some of them you have to teach them, like I had to teach my psychology professors, and there's some that are going to be easy, they will follow along, and there's some, you explain them once, they'll get it, and some of them try to self-advocate, have your student self-advocate for themselves of how to, show them their accommodations and stuff like that. And worst comes to worst, then get your OSD counselor involved. So that's why it's kind of important to get that personal collection, so that way at least you know who's your counselor, how you go about it.
And that's another thing, like I said, how it's important at the beginning of high school to start thinking about how a student might need accommodations on their standardized testing and start looking at applying for that early. This is an area, too, where if a student doesn't have the strongest self-advocacy skills, hasn't been very involved with their IEP meeting before, you can start incorporating the student into the process in high school and helping guide them through it. Students, once they turn 18, are entitled to come to their IEP meetings. They're now the mandatory member of the meeting as opposed to their parents. But especially if a student's going to plan to go to college and plan to need to self-advocate in the future, it's important that they start being involved earlier. And just from a personal, person-centered focus, it's important for the student to be involved, because high school is where decisions about your future are being made, and so it's important to allow a student, even a student with a disability, to participate in those discussions. So we finally made it to employment. So if the student isn't going to college, we can now start thinking about them as well. So VR and employment. If college or university isn't part of the plan, VR can still help. Of course, there are tons of jobs that you don't need to go to college for. And VR being focused on employment, they can help work on the skills and steps that you need to be able to accomplish an employment goal, even if college isn't one of those steps. So again, they can provide that time-limited medical and psychological treatment. They can provide training and work experience, still provide assistance with transportation, assistive technology and devices, and they can provide training and coaching. And then these are the services that I mentioned. The next slide is missing the DBS page, but it's just the Division of Blind Services. It's I think myfloridadbs.com or something, but you can find the information, I believe, on the Disability Rights Florida webpage. So if you can't find it just with a quick Google, which is how I found it, you can go to our page, which is linked in part of the PowerPoint, and it'll be provided through there. The Client Assistance Program, which is the second component of this, is actually in Florida run under the Protection and Advocacy as well. So Disability Rights Florida is the Client Assistance Program. And that program, that component of Disability Rights Florida, assists with people seeking services through VR and DBS. The CAP is designed to empower people with disabilities to understand and exercise their right to VR and DBS services. and to help them make informed choices about vocational rehabilitation and independent living. So Disability Rights Florida can help provide information on those services, the timeframes for the services and the requirements, and can help advocate and assist in resolving disagreements between people with disabilities and their VR counselors. So, like I said, CAP can provide support and assistance to consumers in advocacy, can provide information and referral. We can also make supported referrals to vocational rehabilitation, and can review case records and speak with counselors and help resolve disagreements. We can also assist systemic issues and increase access to assistive technology and workplace modifications, and can assist with obtaining accommodations in the workplace. So like I said, supervisory referrals and a lot of advocacy and negotiation on the part of on behalf of persons with disabilities in advocating with VR. VR is an incredibly important resource for persons with disabilities, and we want to make sure that if a student is entitled or a person is entitled to those services, that they have access to them. So if obviously it's not going to be as easy as I've just explained it today, there are roadblocks that come up along the way, and if those roadblocks come up and you can't figure out, or the student with a disability or person with a disability can't figure out how to remove that roadblock, and you've tried working with guidance counselors, working with your Office of Students with Disabilities counselor, if you've tried working with a VR counselor and you're hitting a wall, CAP is a resource, Disability Rights Florida is a resource that can help you navigate those roadblocks. And then the bottom link here, disabilityrightsflorida.org, that's where you can find the DBS link that I failed to include on the other page. And that's all we have. So if you guys have any other questions.
Sometimes we run into prior foster children, if you will, who have not gained access to these services, and maybe they're 22 years of age, and they realize they need services. Your organization, should we just refer them to you or to the local vocational rehab office then for assistance?
Yeah, so we can provide guidance and information and referral. Vocational rehabilitation could provide the actual services. So I would say definitely refer them to us, because if nothing else, we can provide them information. But vocational rehabilitation is definitely a resource for those students, especially if they haven't gotten services they need in high school or a high school diploma.
Thank you.
How does IEP and IEPT apply to charter schools?
So public charter schools fall under the local educational agency of the district, so they should have IEP and TIEP, no changes. Private charter schools, more like a private school, can't really speak to that as much because private schools don't have to follow the same sort of federal regulations, but if it's a public charter school, the district should be requiring the same thing of that charter school of the public schools.
So the testing that's required for the IEP and the charter schools do that, or do they refer it back to the public schools?
Like the psychological testing? It's going to depend how their relationship works with the district. Some districts keep a closer hand on their charter schools, and some districts, they operate mostly on their own unless something's going wrong. But certainly a charter school should never say that they don't have the resources to do an evaluation, because they definitely can refer them back to the district. They might do it on their own ordinarily, but you should never be hearing we don't have the resources to do that evaluation, because they could.
That's where the student is placed.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of times, unfortunately, we have children who transfer schools a lot. They're a place that's not stable, they have to move, they move out of county. What's your recommendation for how to keep some sort of continuity with their IEP, VR? Can they transfer offices for vacation if we get them in?
Mm-hmm. So they can transfer VR offices, yes. And then as far as the IEP works, I recommend, and this is for all my students with IEPs, not just ones who might be moving a lot, but I always ask an IEP team to make sure that the IEP itself is a comprehensive guide to that student. So I have IEPs where the parent input section or the student present level section is like 3 or 4 typewritten pages in addition to the IEP, because we wanted to make sure that all of that student's individual needs got addressed. because anyone should be able to pick up the IEP and know what services that student needs. And that's especially important. The hypothetical I give in IEP meetings when I ask for this is, well, what if this student moves to Nebraska tomorrow? And it doesn't always have to be that dramatic. What if they move to another school in the district? But especially for students in the foster care system, it's important because if they move to another school, that school should be able to pick it up, know what that student's level is, know what that student's needs are, and what services that they need to be successful. So I would suggest making sure that everything is listed on the IEP as completely as possible. And you, as an advocate or a guardian ad litem, can ask the school to include input from you. If they're not putting it on there themselves, you can say, as a parent, as an advocate, we'd like it noted that this student has this unique need, and that this is how it's being addressed right now. And you can also submit supplemental notes at the end if you feel something's not adequately addressed during the IEP meeting. Parents have a right to send in notes, and so for a student in foster care, their foster parent or advocate would be able to send in that note and say, please attach this to the end of the IEP to make sure that when they're moving, that they're getting the continuity of service. And there's a requirement that when students move district to district or state to state, that the services that they're being provided remain as noted on the IEP until the receiving district does evaluations that say that something else should be happening. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, I think that's it for us then. Oh yeah, and we have a raffle. And then we're going to just quickly raffle off this Starbucks card.
Colleges have like employment placement services as well. For instance, in an area where you might be interested in a profession, you might be interested in they have assistance with that, and also with regards to internships, they assist with that as well.
The colleges themselves?
Or with employees of the colleges themselves, or the counselor help with the student getting internships and then perhaps subsequently employment within the profession, student into their profession.
From my point of view, from starting, it really depends on the university. It depends on what the kid's into. Like I know for a few kids that want to go in the gallery route through the art world, they kind of volunteered, help with the galleries as much as they can, even helping with the undergrads and master programs, setting up for the artwork and stuff like that, and even helping watching the actual professional artists for that term or year, set up their work and everything, and explore. Really depends on the university itself and how the kid perceives that degree. I know at one kid, he actually got a master's recently, master's of political science, and was really pushing forward, got involved with their the political aspect of this year, and got involved and went off to volunteer through his local community of the Democratic Party and everything else like that. And so it really depends on the school and the kid itself.
And if an internship is required for the career path as far as employment goes, that should be something that's on the IPE with VR, and they should be able to assist with getting you an internship that's necessary for your employment path. Okay.
Just pick one out. Yep. Deborah Wells. Thank you for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to email and contact Disability Rights Florida. So yeah, thank you very much.